And we're live. Dark, welcome to our podcast this evening. You want to say hi to everybody?
Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to episode 2 of Under the Helmet. I have a nice spicy topic for everyone. Kaz here. I'll give you back the stage.
You guys can begin by hearing all of my Outlook sounds because I forgot to turn all that off. So this is a fabulous start.
And the sound
Uh,
of my fan going off so that way I don't have a damn hurricane going through my mic. It's going to be hot, so we got to keep this fast.
you would think that at 9 o'clock EDT I would not be getting work emails, but that is happening as we speak. So great way to start things off here. But at any rate, my name is Kaz, of course. Happy to kind of do this once again. For those of you that may or may not have missed last week, we have started a series that we're calling Under the Helmet. And the purpose is to try to bring something a little unique to the Foxhole community, doing and speaking about stuff that we feel qualified to speak about or unqualified to speak about. But the idea is to kind of address leadership and personal growth and development, and try to apply these principles both to the game that we play and the hobby that we enjoy, and also to reflect on ourselves as individuals, how we can be better, how we can be stronger as people, and ultimately live happier lives in our hobby and in our profession or at play, if you will. And so that's the idea, and we'll see if we can kind of continue to accomplish that. We got pretty decent feedback the last time we did this, and so we're grateful for the feedback we received, both positive and some of the opportunities for improvement that we received, and we'll continue to grow in that as we get more experience. But my intention is to dive straight into this. As Dark said, this topic's a little spicy, and I've taught conflict management many times before. I'm going to be approaching it a little differently because I'm speaking to an audience that's got a hobby, gaming as a hobby. So the context changes significantly when you think in those terms. And so going through kind of how I intend to approach this, we're going to talk about the idea of why should you even care about this. I know I'm talking in some cases to students, maybe to children. Maybe you've got a career that you've just started, or maybe you've got a deep career, and nevertheless, you're playing a game, for God's sake. What in the world does conflict have to do, and why should you care about it? We're going to try to address that question. We're going to talk about conflict management gone wrong. I think it's kind of helpful to meditate for a moment and reflect on where we've gone so wrong in managing conflict, I guess, and why conflict is managed poorly so frequently. We're going to talk about respect and patience as a key attribute to managing conflict and kind of try to sell that idea. And then last but not least, we're going to go through some just very raw tactics of how can you manage conflict. What are some things that you can put in your toolbox to make you more successful when you find yourself in a situation where you're against somebody in some meaningful way. And so, Dark, anything to add before we get started?
Okay, just to do a rough summary, like this is just to help you guys understand that, we're going to do our best to visualize this, just not just in game wise, but these teachings can help you in real life as well, just in general. So this is something that's a very an interesting subject to just overcome and learn, because this is what a lot of people, either in leadership or just as a normal person, have trouble really how to deal with conflict and how to really treat it. And even though, again, I do want to emphasize, I'm not in any sort of way in a position to speak on this. So again, Cass is going to be taking most of the steering here, and I'll try to chime in with what I can to help either visualize things or just my general input on stuff. So that's just it for me.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and dive right into why should you care? Why does this matter to you as an individual? And I think that what I intend to do is make the case that this matters to you regardless of what your state is, because you're going to find yourself in a position of conflict no matter what you're doing, no matter what your profession you choose. Because if you're interacting with people, you got conflict, okay? And at the end of the day, good conflict management technique is ultimately less stressful. I think that's going to become obvious when we go through it. When we go through the tactics and continue to talk through this philosophy for conflict management. But what you're going to find is it's a lot easier you're a lot more comfortable. You don't have all this stress surrounding broken relationships and difficult relationships that aren't going your way, and you may not even understand why it's not going your way. When you do it properly, you can actually find a lot of win-win situations. I don't find conflict to be a binary situation in many cases. I think a lot of people take a binary approach to it, that it's either my way or the highway, or their way or the highway. It's either left or right, and there's a whole host of middle ground for a great variety of different situations that you might find yourself in. Again, both in game and out of the game. And then the last two are very related, but I think this is probably the most critical. When you do a good job of learning conflict management technique and you have a good conflict management philosophy, you keep important relationships healthy and mutually beneficial. And so, what I mean by that is, your spouse, your kids, your parents, people you go to work with, your boss, you're going to be in conflict with these people at some point. And your ability to have a healthy and robust conflict, one that's constructive, is going to be the difference between that relationship growing or that relationship beginning to flounder. And just to oversimplify it, you see in our society a lot of marriages that fail, and a lot of marriages don't do well because you have two people in very close proximity to each other that are intending to spend a lot of time with each other, and by many definitions, their entire lives together. And when you spend that much time with somebody, you're going to run into conflict with them. And most of the time, when marriages break down, it's because they didn't handle that conflict well. For whatever the reason, there's a whole lot of specific things that go into that, but that conflict broke the marriage because for some reason, some way, somehow, they couldn't resolve that conflict. Now, I'm not going to say that every single one of those situations, but good conflict technique or even a good conflict philosophy would win the day. But you can improve the probability of you winning those things or not having those things destroy things that are important and valuable to you by approaching that conflict from a constructive perspective. Same thing goes for unimportant relationships. And this is one that I think is more relevant to the current context of what we're talking about, because I'm going to argue that most of the relationships, if I can call them that you run into in Foxhole, be it whether you're in a clan, whether you're part of a faction, you're still running into players with some level of frequency that become, I'm going to define, unimportant relationships. Now, those unimportant relationships can be a source of future collaboration and even joy if you nurture them right and you choose to make them into friendships, or you choose to make them into future opportunities. If you take that outside the gaming context, you run into a whole host of people in your life that don't appear to have any relevance to you now, but may become important to you much later in the future in ways that you couldn't even possibly think about and imagine. A coworker that you see once a month may get assigned to a project with you where you got to work very closely with them, and damage that you've done that relationship can come to haunt you. Even worse, somebody that you worked with, somebody that you even grew up with, you may find is your boss one day. And then suddenly that damaged relationship from what you've said or done in the past comes back to haunt you. And that may seem like it's a really improbable thing, but I remember when I was in high school, uh, there was somebody that I think had quoted Bill Gates. I'm gonna butcher this quote, but Bill Gates has simply said, "Be nice to the nerds because they may be your bosses one day." And sure enough, one day later on in my life, I had one of my high school peers reporting to me at work. And fortunately, we had a constructive enough relationship that could function. But imagine the difficulty if people are immature or they sacrifice relationships without regard to future consequences, that can create some awkward situations. And it feels weird to talk about something this serious in the context of Foxhole, but I think that you're going to be in a much better place if you find good ways to resolve conflict with people that you come into contact with, both in game and out of game, as a standard behavior. And one of the things that we talked about last stream that I think is kind of important understanding this is, let's see how to best describe this. You ultimately, the things that you do most frequently become your habits and they become your behaviors, and they become the places that you go unconsciously. And so one of the things that I try to do is build good habits in everything, and I try to build good habits in conflict management, because even if I'm gaming and I'm in this non-consequential world where I can say whatever I want and do whatever I want, I'm still building habits. And the way that I handle conflict in this casual unconscious sense is going to be my go-to when I'm caught flat-footed, when I'm caught off guard in a situation in real life. And you'd be surprised how many people in their lives struggle to have good conflict management skills because they've spent so much time wrecking relationships with people they don't care about. And that's all they know how to do. That's all that they've practiced. Therefore, they're quite good at it. They have literally practiced being bad at conflict management, and therefore, that's what they find themselves doing over and over and over again. And so I think it's very important to consider those facets and make a very purposeful choice of what are you going to practice and how are you going to behave and what are you going to do philosophically, so that when you do hit a situation where you're flat-footed, you've already prepared yourself for how you're going to perform in that situation. So Dark, if it's all right with you, I'm going to pause there. I do want to move to the next slide here in just a moment, but any thoughts to share on this opening philosophy here?
Just to help visualize it more, so like let's just say for example you're playing Foxhole and it's like around the first early stages of the game, and you're just playing by yourself, and there's some people that And let's be honest, we're not going to get along with everyone, but how should you react during any situations if someone's acting like, they're acting kind of rude? You can either choose to act just as rude back and probably start an argument and stun them off, but it all comes off in perspective of, because in the end all we ever know people by is their usernames, and you kind of build yourself your own identity in Foxhole. And sometimes certain people stick out more, especially if you want to contest with someone else. And let's say things don't go off well, and you ended the conversation because you're just like, ah, fuck this. But the conversation didn't end up well, and you were just spiraling. You guys are throwing curse words up at each other. End of the day, maybe it didn't end with like a team kill or anything, but let's just fast forward that, like, late game. Now you spawned in the world, and you're like, oh, you know what? I would love to try let's try the new heavy armor. And then out of nowhere, out of chance of luck, that guy you just ran into is now driving, and asking for a crew. And you just, it clicks in both of your heads, like, oh, that's that guy I was arguing with. Fuck that dude. I don't want him in here. And it's just awkward scenarios, and you would think, oh, it's just a game, like it doesn't, but just as Cass said, is you're going to be, this is what you're practicing, and if you practice being a shitty person in some way or another, it's going to leak out to your daily life, just out of just habit. And it's like one of the best things you could ever do online is to just practice good habits, because you don't have that barrier of dealing with people. So that way, whenever you're in a real life situation, hey, guess what you've been talking verbally in a game can actually impact you in real life. And that's like one of the things that people should really think about, and doing it a little more better, is don't take it for granted just because, oh yeah, no one can hold me accountable, so I'm just going to say F you to everyone I see, because I'm not going to have any repercussions. But in some way or another, you never know. That's the whole thing about our futures as humans, is that we will never know what will happen. And that's like, if you want to do nothing but burn bridges, you're gonna end up walking towards one of those burned bridges and be like, well, damn, you know there's nothing you can do at that point.
It's
That's all I
really
got to
interesting.
say.
I love what Dark said there because and kind of two thoughts to springboard off that. So first of all, one of the things I'm really grateful for, and I've been gaming in a competitive sense since I was 15 years old. Now I'm 33 now, and I've always been involved in games, sometimes more, sometimes less. But I practiced and I learned and I made a lot of mistakes as a young guy in this environment that I didn't make professionally, which is really weird to think about and talk about. And it kind of like, especially earlier in my life when I tried to like really understand and help people understand how much this did for me, like from a development perspective. I grew in ways because I took seriously, like, and some people may roll their eyes at it, but I took seriously, the relationships I had and the commitments that I made. I joined a gaming outfit earlier, and I wanted to win. I wanted to do well. I wanted to perform well. I wanted to lead. And I got in a position of leadership when I was, 16 years old, leading a whole group of guys in a game, and I tried to do the best I could. And I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned from those mistakes very early in a safe environment where it didn't have career consequences, right? And that environment was very casual, and so it's very much a training ground. This playground that we have to kind of test and to learn and to grow if you want to use it that way. And that's the beautiful thing about it. You can use it for whatever you want. If you want to be a shitter, you can be a shitter, but be ready for the consequences. And at the same time, if you want to hone good technique, you want to hone good principles, you want to make good relationships, that's great. I've got relationships that have lasted 15, 16, 17, 18 years from that time period, from when I just started as a kid. From people that I remember and have played with and stayed in contact, in and out of touch with over these years. And I'm really grateful that I nurtured those relationships and we've become good friends. We've met up sometimes, even in real life, to kind of catch up and shoot the breeze. And it's just interesting how that has continued this long for this many years. And the other thing that Dark mentioned is absolutely true about, especially in game in the Foxhole context, that what you say and do does have wide ramifications for what, who's willing to work with you and who's not willing to work with you. And without getting into specific details, it is not irregular for members of the community to try to join our outfit in DK, for instance, who have crapped on us or crapped on other people and just been generally ugly people in the community, and they don't always get a pass and join our ranks because of silly and stupid things that they've said that they didn't realize people were watching or paying attention to, and gave us the impression that that's not what we want to be affiliated with. That's not what we're about, and it kind of becomes a stumbling block for them. Now, we're not hard-nosed enough to withhold opportunity from every single person that's made a mistake. We try to be flexible. We try to be patient, kind, and help people work and grow, because that's something that a lot of us, especially in this leadership group, are very passionate about. But don't think that it just gets passed over without somebody asking some questions, and some very hard questions about whether or not this is what we want to be doing. And those kind of things are things that you never, as an individual, hear of or think about. But those kind of discussions happen around you all the time without your consciousness, about the way you behave and your reputation. And it's generally better that people want to work with you. I mean, I think that's a very common thing, a common desire, that you want to have people desire to have you in their tank. You want people desire to have you in their squad. So be a respectful and likable person. That shouldn't be that complicated. Yet we so commonly run to the extreme of being a negative person for that little adrenaline rush or that ego boost that comes with it. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. But I appreciate those comments, Doc, for sure. I definitely empathize with that. So let's talk about conflict management gone wrong then. And so, of all the slides that I'm talking about tonight, this is the one that gives me the most anxiety. I'll just confess right now, because I'm a little hesitant to go here, but I'm gonna run head first, without regard for my own safety. So, one of the things that I've noticed, especially in the last 10, 15, 20 years, as I look at the way that people choose to manage conflict, and I'm talking in a professional context and in a personal one, is I've seen a gravitation toward very aggressive, take no prisoners form of conflict management. In my theory, and this is the world according to Kaz, it's not Bible, it's not even a good leadership theory, but it's just my perspective on things, is that what is driving this trend is the trends in our political discourse, what we see from many politicians. I'm speaking from an American context at this point, but I think that it's been replicated in some cases across the seas as well. And what I'm going to call the art of trolling that has taken such a firm grip in areas of our society, especially in the gaming community. I mean, trolling is a way of life in the gaming community. And I'm going to talk about both of these things individually and how they affect us and how they affect the way that we approach conflict. So, talking first about political conflict, the first thing to acknowledge when we look at political conflict and we look at it as a model for how we ought to deal with our opponents is to first realize that politicians that are going to battle against one another have a different goal and a different perspective than you or I do if we go into conflict with an individual. So a politician that is in conflict, so we'll just use, let's say Donald Trump and Joe Biden are coming to blows right now because they disagree on a whole host of different policy proposals and they believe that they should be the president of the United States. When they argue with each other, they're not trying to persuade each other of that, they're trying to persuade you of that. Anything that they say, anything that they do, all of their actions should be looked at in the prism of how it's going to affect the headline that's going to be written the next day and how it's going to be read by the person that reads that headline. Therefore, their tactics for conflict are designed to do just that. They're not designed to harmonize a relationship with the other person. They're not designed to encourage collaboration with the other side of the aisle. They're designed to either gain points or take points away from the other team, and it is ruthless and intended to be ruthless. And I don't think that that's a good thing. Nobody asked my opinion. Nevertheless, it's not going to be good for you personally. Because if you take that same approach to conflict with your wife, see how long you're going to be married. If you go in and you talk about all the horrible things that she does. So let's say you get in an argument with your wife and then you suddenly bring out the list, the long litany of all the things that she's done to you wrong over the last couple of years and why she's not qualified to criticize you. Guess how long that's going to work for you? I mean, I don't think you have to speculate too long. And it may seem like a ridiculous example, but I've seen so many difficult marriages and difficult relationships in my personal life where those are the go-tos. Is we immediately bring out the nuclear armaments and we start having a conversation with our spouse and our loved ones like we're having a political argument like you'd see on TV today. And again, my theory is that a lot of people behave that way because they haven't conceived or thought of a better way to handle that conflict, or it's not been demonstrated for them for a better way to have that conflict. So they just go dial it up to 11 immediately and then go on the attack. And so that's part of what the political environment does to us. I think most of you, if you have any social media feeds or you pay attention to your social media feeds, you've probably noticed that there's a lot of weird stuff happening on your social media feeds right now. People that you thought you liked, you don't like as much as you used to because they're saying really weird stuff and they're being really aggressive and really hostile. And people that they used to coordinate with and collaborate with, they no longer talk and they no longer like each other. That's bad conflict management. That's a take no prisoners approach where you've gotten where the issue has become more important than the relationships of the people around you, and the respect has fled because the issue has become more important than the person. We're going to talk a little bit more about respect and the role it plays in conflict management here in a minute, but this is all possible because of a loss of respect at the end of the day. Let's talk for a second, just a second, about trolling and what I'm going to call the art of stroking your ego. Again, this is a very common thing that you see, especially in our wonderful realm. And again, when I look at trolling and it's very difficult to define trolling because it comes in many different forms. But ultimately, the purpose and the design is one of two things. It's either to get attention or it's stroke your ego a little bit. And I'm going to defend that by saying most trolls troll people in public context. If you really think about it, you look back on trolls and people that are trolling other individuals or trying to get a rise at people, they're doing so on public forums, they're doing so on public discords, they're doing so in world chat, they're doing so in areas that can gather attention for themselves and gather attention for that conflict because they get an adrenaline rush of quote unquote owning somebody or defeating somebody in that environment. And so, like, the art of trolling very simply is whoever gets mad first loses, at least in my definition. And so the objective is to make somebody else lose their shit first or you come at a loss of words, and then you've won the argument. You have beaten and defeated that person through trolling, and you get whatever benefits come from that, whatever they happen to be. But that's a common thing. That's a common place for people to go to. I don't understand the appeal, but I'm affected by it. I've been there. I kind of I've made those mistakes and I've done those things. I understand sometimes the feeling you get when you just made somebody look like a fool, and sometimes that feels good. And I'm like, well, why does that feel good? Well, because it's stroking your ego a little bit. Because that guy looks dumb, you look a little bit better. And the things that you do badly, the things that you do poorly, your weaknesses aren't on display right now. It's somebody else's weaknesses. And as a result, you compare favorably to somebody that you've made look the fool, and your ego is stroked. Um, Again, that may not be gospel, but that's my opinion on it, and why I think one of the possible reasons that we see people go there and live there in that environment. However, the consequences of that we've already talked about. The consequences are you damage your relationship in pursuit of that, and you don't really gain anything. Like when I think of people that I know are common trolls, and maybe they're really good at trolling, I don't look at that guy as somebody I admire. I don't say, well, that guy's really smart or that guy's really good or I never see those things, and so it's really interesting that it's something that's as popular as it is. So once again, Dark, I'm gonna pause for a second, take a drink of water. Any thoughts on what we've covered so far?
Other than like the main thing we'll always focus on, just mainly for these under the helmets, is always going to be something about keeping your ego in check, because that's just a lot of trolling and whatnot really stems from, is like you just feel it feels, if there's a certain feeling you get just from trash talking, and I have that problem too, where it just feels good to just smack talk. And this could easily go in from just not even in a cooperative setting, like you just down a colonial, and he was being particularly pesky, you know what I mean? He was like shadow dancing, running at you with a pistol, and you manage to get the upper hand, and you down him. And let's say he says something and says something offensive, and you can reply back saying, something just as bad. And that's a good scenario there where you're unintentionally harming relations, because you guys never know, even from an enemy, the person you just killed could eventually want to switch sides later on. And look at the scenario, like we said earlier. Well, now this guy is on your team, but you guys were just talking, trash, and had that an horrible engagement with one another because you're both just trying to troll. And it just things don't end well at that in that part.
Most of this stuff is naturally harmless because it's almost become socially acceptable to trash talk, and healthy banter is one thing, outright toxicity is another. There is a difference between the two, and so I don't want to become completely hard nosed to it or turn my nose up at the idea that this is entirely unproductive. Healthy competitive talk is fine. I know that we've got some guys in DK that have been, I think, I have to call it heresy, but I think it's cool that we've got some guys in DK that have been building decent relationships with guys from Som. Som being a colonial loyalist clan, but they've been spending some time with those guys and they've been getting to know each other, and it's been healthy banter and it's been healthy competition, and that's to the good. I mean, I want to commend that in one respect because that's a great way to be a competitor, is to be competitive, to give each other some grief here and there, but for it to be good natured and well intended, and to be a good sport at the end of the day. And there's a balance to all that, because I think that you've definitely seen. I don't have to define it for you. You know what outright toxicity looks like. It's just, you don't have to work hard to define it. You know what it looks like when you see it. And you don't want to bleed over into that. And so I think in all things, finding some balance is fine, especially in a community that has a high tolerance level for this kind of thing. But if you take that over to a work context, you can get into trouble. And there are even certain work contexts where a certain healthy banter is fine, and it's a culture of the organization. But there are some guys that take it too far, and then they damage relationships, or somebody new joins the organization that doesn't have that culture and isn't committed to that or doesn't understand it, and then those relationships get hurt because somebody's a little bit more aggressive than that person's comfortable with. And so again, it's just finding balance and finding where people are and meeting people where they are. I think that's a large part of it. I do want to transition now and talk a little bit about respect and patience, though, because this is, I've talked about the previous two slides to really tee this one up. Because if there's any virtue that you need to model to have effective conflict management, it's respect. Bottom line, hands down, if you can get that right, you will be naturally positioned well to handle conflict from the beginning. I've got this picture on here. Most of my pictures are relevant, but this one means a little bit to me, because I find that in competition, competitors that respect one another are more likely to be successful than competitors who trash talk and demean their opponents. And the reason for that, in my opinion, is if you respect your opponent, you respect his capabilities. And when you respect somebody's capabilities, you're more likely to measure them appropriately and not underestimate them. Now, there's such a thing as overestimating your opponent. That's not what I'm talking about. When I talk about respecting somebody, it's about giving them the proper amount of deference that they ought to have. When I talk about humility, I'm not talking about talking down to yourself or having a lower of opinion of yourself than you should. It's having an appropriate understanding of your capabilities, of your strengths, and of your weaknesses. True humility is not talking low or being lowly. It's understanding who you really are and balancing and the balance of your strengths and weaknesses, and then owning that and being able to live within that. And I think that respect is really a good expression of humility, and it's a good expression of how you can really set the stage to have constructive conflict from the beginning. And so, right out the gate, why conflict gets destructive is because people come out swinging, being disrespectful, or lose respect for the individual in the course of the conflict. Because at the point that you lose respect, you are no longer open to the possibility that that person could be right. And that's a very important possibility to keep in your mind if you want to have constructive conflict. If you're walking into a conflict with your mind made up from the beginning, and there is no room for bargaining, there's no room for empathy, there's no room for understanding, that conflict's going to go bad for you. It almost certainly will go bad for you, because what you're not leaving any room for is for that relationship to flourish and grow in any meaningful way. And you have, through your hubris and pride, denied yourself the opportunity to possibly be better at the same time. Because when you're going into that conflict, because generally speaking, if I want to really define conflict simply, your goals and objectives are frustrated by somebody else's goals and objectives. They are in conflict with one another, and your needs are in apparent odds at this moment. And so, ultimately, with respect, you can then empathize. And what's cool about respect and empathy is that you'll get one of two benefits. Number one, as already mentioned, you will either become persuaded that that person is right, and you will correct your opinion, and you'll be better for it. And you won't be able to get there if you don't respect the other person. You'll never be able to get to the point where you can open your mind and change your mind to somebody that you don't respect. It's not really possible. And then secondarily, if let's say you are right, yet you still respect that person, by respecting that person and trying to empathize with them and understanding that they're a rational human being whom you care about, whom you respect, when you're discussing it with them and you empathize, you can understand how they rationally got to their position. And if you can understand how they got to their position, then you are better able to explain to them why their position might be wrong or why their position might be misinformed. But you can't get there if you didn't walk in able to listen and you didn't walk in trying to understand. And this is one of the key secrets from if I can bring this to a professional context, this is one of the key tools in my toolbox from an HR guy's perspective. So as an HR guy, when I walk into a room and I'm trying to settle a dispute, my job is not to try to impress my opinion on the room. My job is to try to understand the opinions of the people in the room and how they got to those opinions and how they got to those conclusions, and then help them possibly understand better what the situation is. Because generally speaking, when you've got conflict that has risen in intensity to that level where there's like a mediator or somebody trying to help resolve it, is because people aren't always operating on the same facts. They're not always operating on the same information. There's incomplete information. There's damaged relationships. We'll talk, that's an important piece to it. And trying to bring harmony to all those things is one of the key things that a mediator does when he's trying to intercede in a conflict. But you can be your own mediator. There's no reason that you can't be your own mediator in trying to understand the other side, in trying to listen and to understand, be patient and kind, and as a result, get to a better conflict. So as I said here on the slide, when you come to a conflict, be prepared to listen and be prepared to speak. Be prepared to do both. Don't do one and don't forfeit either of those. Both are important. The other thing that needs to happen is when people get emotional or aggressive, you need to be patient and try to understand. You need to be respectful of time and distance when needed. And we'll talk about the last one here in a second. So what I mean by that is, you know, as I've already mentioned when we led this off, I'm going to say most people, I think I can boldly say that most people have very bad conflict management technique. So in all probability, you're going to come into conflict with people that aren't going to do this right. They're not going to treat you with respect. They're going to come in emotionally involved. They're going to be excited. They may be insulting. They may be ugly. They may be a whole host of other negative qualities that make it very difficult to have a good resolution. However, I will boldly say that if you walk into that conversation pulling your weight, where you are respectful, where you are patient, where you are disciplined in your mind, you can carry that conversation across the finish line. And you can take that individual that led into that situation with the wrong foot, that's coming in bad, maybe coming in hot, maybe coming in really ugly. And if you maintain your composure, you maintain your discipline, you can very frequently win that situation over and bring it back to parity, bring it back to a situation where we have mutual shared respect, and then get to a better resolution. However, the most common thing is when somebody comes in and isn't doing their part in the conflict, is to do so back, is to also rise to that occasion, to raise your voice, to argue, to yell, to be intemperate, to disrespect that individual, to no longer listen, to no longer open your mind. Those are the natural things to do. That's natural human behavior. And as a result, you cheat yourself of a possible good solution. And it's only you that's cheating you of that. You can't expect, it's not reasonable to expect everybody that you come into contact with to be reasonable. I'm going to tell you right now, if you go through life denying respect to everybody that doesn't deserve your respect, you're going to be a very lonely person. Because every single one of us have periods of time where we are not deserving of respect, where we stand in need of grace from somebody else to be patient with us, to be kind with us, because we have misstepped, misspoken, done something wrong, not thought through something, been irritated, been ugly, whatever the case is. We constantly stand in need of somebody to be patient with us, and if we don't do that with other people, you're going to be lonely because somebody's going to disappoint you sometimes, somebody close to you. And if you take that opportunity to rub it in and dig in there and get into a fight because they started slinging mud first, that's a bad way to go about it. You're going to be in fights all the time. Whereas if you be the bigger man, where you own the situation a little bit, you own your own behavior, and you don't do it to shame somebody else. You don't do it to condescend to them. You do it because you want what's good for them. You want what's good for that situation. You have a more noble perspective on the issue where you're looking out for their interests as well as your own interests. I mean, that's a good thing. And you benefit from that. That's not entirely selfish. I mean, that apparently selfless act benefits you as well because you grow from that experience. You gain friendship, you gain respect, and you get results as opposed to, you know, conflict, as opposed to gridlock that you might see in our congressional districts over in our society here. Uh, you could get collaboration and you could get partnership instead. A lot to be gained from it. Dark, once again, love your thoughts on where we're at.
I just feel like this is probably like recapping what I was hinting at earlier. Just having mutual respect for even for your own teammates or even for the enemy is like almost a key thing to just really have in a gaming sense because you're just building up your reputation. Are you that type of player that, oh, this guy's toxic, don't even bother interacting with them, just avoid them, you're better off. And words and rumors spread out, and this is just me personally, I don't really want a bad name going out of coming from me. But if you're always a well respected person that no matter what, you may think, oh, the person that's being rude, his opinion's not going to change. i- in a sense, it kind of doesn't matter if he doesn't change, because you're still the one putting the effort to give respect and patience to the situation you're interacting with that individual. And when everyone is, because it's not just only going to be you, you're going to be playing with others, or it's going to be people surrounding and looking at you, whether it be in game or IRL. They're going to know how, oh, look how this person handles the situation. This person is being unreasonable, but this person, he's keeping his composure, he's being respectful, letting the person speak when they need to, having patience. And it just gives you a good look on in the end. And that's one of the things I always try to like strive out to tell people is, no matter what in these type of situations, just try to be the bigger and better man. It doesn't matter if that guy just disabled your truck, just don't don't result to just calling him an a-hole, you know. Try to talk it out, and in the end, if he still manages to destroy your truck and kill you, you have other tools to handle the situation. You could speak to other people. But if you have that baggage of being a toxic person, you think people are going to care when someone is acting malicious towards you? It's kind of just more like, it's two evils attacking each other. Carry on, guys. And
Right.
this is the things, like, you want to be a better person. And it's just it's just like, what you practice is what you develop as a habit, and then it just becomes your daily life. This is just me. I just feel like, if you wake up, go on your computer, be an asshole to everyone you meet, and that some way or form is going to leach out to your daily life, and that inner core of toxicity that you have this habit of will leach into your daily life. And I just think it's not healthy in general just to be a type of person like that. I understand you can't help it because some of it is an impulse, and no one can help you. It's all human nature to have these impulses of being a little bit volatile and whatnot, but it's just learning how to, just for example, let's say you start off the conversation and you have this volatile impulse. You can still follow up with your best ability to be like, you know what, I'm sorry, I just said that, I didn't mean it, it was just the heat of the moment. Because there's this situation, like, if you don't mind, Cass, because this is one of
No,
the
go
things
ahead,
that
man.
I always find, like how I can love and hate the community in the same breath. I was playing this Dota 2 match. We're about 15 minutes in, and for those who don't know, Dota is a mobile game similar to League of Legends, and unlike League of Legends, it has a built-in mic system where you can actually communicate with your teammates. And at the start, me and this certain guy were not hitting it off at all. And it's
You're
like,
getting a
I'm
little
doing my
robotic on me,
best.
dog.
Oh, sorry, kind of just like cut off. What was the last thing I said?
You just got a little robotic, and you just talked about you and this guy hitting it off.
So me and this gentleman we were not hitting it off. We were kind of like up against each other just from the heroes we picked, and it was more like the guy was giving me flack. I would just try to be, just trying to like, it doesn't matter. Who cares what this guy thinks? But it would be, he would say something, then I would say something, and it would just resort to, you like, we're just going against each other. We're already going against another team of five guys, and what our interactions did was, well, we kind of are going against ourselves. We're hurting our team. we're both we were both playing some form of a carry role, and we weren't working together. We would rather be greedy and trying to compete on one another, which is screwing the team in general. And there was a point where there was a conversation that we were just going at it for like a good like 2 minutes straight, insulting, talking about life choices in the game and whatnot. And I just like, you know what, I'm a back step and be like, you know what, I want to apologize for all the things I just said, because you know what, I was just upset about what going on, and I guess we just ended in a real bad foot. I would like to work things out, and just so we can win for the sake of the game. Like, I'm sorry for all the stuff, I apologize. The guy accepted it, and it was just like mind opening how that little like second of an apology, and we just synergized, and just like we won the game just from jolly cooperation at that point. And it's just, I can never forget that moment of gaming, of just that first 15 minutes I was just hating like the community and the game, and just like general of how toxic people can be. But then, like, if I never just took that initiative myself, just to step back and apologize, we would have lost that game, and I would have been like a 30 to an hour game of just pure stress and anger, because being upset and being upset for such a long time again is not healthy for you. And it's like, would you rather feel like, I mean, it's just being when you're doing good as a team, you're doing good individually, it feels good to do good. But when you're doing bad, is going on with our topic of last week of putting blames and excuses, you're not giving yourself any good deeds at all. You're just as bad to blame as the guy you were, going against. And you only have nothing to lose. There's nothing to win in that scenario.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it's just, I'll never forget that in gaming. Just the fact that we won just from that apology is just like, wow. You never know. You never know with these with life. And always try to be the positive, or be that person that wants to take the step to be the better person. That's again all I can say on that as well.
no, I appreciate that, and that's a great example. I think, yeah, I've spent a lot of time looking at professional gaming organizations and teams across different games, be it Dota, Counter Strike, Overwatch, even. And one of the things that's really interesting is when you kind of get into the team dynamics of those teams and what makes them succeed and fail. Like, these teams from professional organizations put in a tremendous amount of resources at the highest levels of gameplay into coaches. Professional coaches that not only just help guide them in their gameplay, but guide them in their mentality. And one of the things that a lot of pros struggle with when they go from that amateur to that pro level is a mindfulness quality that they have to grow in, because they've spent all this time and all this toxicity in gaming. And then when you have to play at the highest levels of competitive play, your where your mind is will, if you go there, if you go to a dark place, you go to a toxic place, you can't win in that environment. Like, the other team that's not in that toxic environment, that's just as good and is just as strong as you, is, if they're more disciplined than you, they're going to win. Because you've defeated yourself in your own mind, because you have backstabbed your teammate, or you've let your teammate get under your skin, or you've let some toxicity take hold. I think one of the more famous ones, actually, from my perspective, for those of you that had any remote attention to Overwatch scene, is XQC. XQC is a very popular streamer now, but he used to be in the Overwatch League and was removed from the Overwatch League from his team in large part because of his toxic attitude, and his toxicity level was so intense that he not only destroyed his own career, but he severely damaged the ability for his team to function and play, because he broke his toxicity was so heavy, he broke the minds of the people he was playing with. Very talented players, exceptionally talented players, that could no longer collaborate and function because of that level of toxicity that they were having to play with and compete with on the highest stage of competitive play. It just wasn't tenable. And you take that at that very extreme level, and you can apply it. I mean, really, you can apply that anywhere. Teams, groups of people cannot function in that kind of an environment, where somebody is always ready to become disrespectful, to destabilize the team or the group of players that they're playing with. It just will not work in the long term. Performance will suffer at the end of the day, and nobody wins in that environment at all. Um, Moving on, this is the last slide that we have from a content perspective, and really, it's kind of weird. In a lot of cases, I would usually lead with this, and for some, I think I've talked about some of these principles before with some people, and so this shouldn't be new to a few guys. But I want to move from the philosophy of conflict management and move to the raw tactics of conflict management. And so I would argue that the philosophy is probably even more important than the tactics. So getting your mind straight, getting your brain and your self-centered is going to be more important than anything that you choose to do here, because it colors how you would approach all of these interactions. And so I want you, as we look at these things, remember that all of these things must be approached from a perspective of mutual respect and calm and patience, right? And so, the idea of competing, a lot of people misunderstand what it means to compete in a conflict. And so there are certain times in a conflict when you need to compete for what is right, where you know that it's a life or death situation in the literal sense, not the gaming sense, where the alternative is not acceptable. Where there is not enough time to discuss alternatives and you're in a position of authority, those are times when you need to compete, when you need to say very clearly and decisively, I know we're at odds, but this is what we're doing. Uh, I'm responsible for this decision. I must lead. Therefore, this is the decision, and we don't have time to have a committee on this. That's a great time to compete. Because there are certain times that, like, especially in the gaming, in Foxhole, that's really the best example of it. Is in Foxhole, you don't always have time to debate who has the best idea. Somebody needs to make a call, and that's going to be whoever's in command, and he's going to make a bad call. Every now and again, he's going to make a bad call, but making a bad call is better than making no call, in many cases. And so it's just one of those things to keep in mind. When you do that, Remember, respect, patience, kindness. You don't need to run somebody over. You can very much say, hey, I appreciate your perspective, and I'd love to talk about how we approach this in the future. But for right now, we're going to do this, right? Acknowledge that individual, acknowledge that they're valued, acknowledge that their opinions are relevant, that you're not dismissing them, that you're not being disrespectful. But a decision has to be made, and you have to move on. Let's talk for a minute about accommodating. This is kind of the exact opposite of competing, but yeah, I love where Weatherby's at. TKing everybody is definitely one solution you can lean into. But accommodating is where you can concede to another person, right? So the exact opposite. You're in a conflict with somebody. You guys have two different ideas. At a certain point, the person is more important than the issue. Conceding that conflict is a good way to keep that relationship healthy. And so at the end of the day, that is a very effective in a casual sense. I go there a lot of the times. For me, a lot of issues and a lot of situations, a lot of my opinions aren't that important to me. I'm not that proud of one situation or one issue or the other. I'm not that proud of my idea or my thought that if somebody else wants to do something, even if I don't agree with it, I'll concede that. I'll give it a go because that person's more important. Their development's more important to me than winning the argument. Their development's more important to me than we win the issue. Their development's more important to me than us winning the op. And so at the end of the day, it depends on what your prioritization is. And I know that there's a lot of competitors that just can't satisfy that. So if all you're about is winning and winning all the time, sometimes it can be hard to look at accommodating another individual for their own well-being or conceding the point. The other time to concede is when you're wrong. This is a hard one, but every now and again you just might be wrong, and that person, opening your mind that person can persuade you, say, you know what, I see the merits of what you said. Let's go ahead and go with your idea. You've accommodated that person. A very effective way to resolve conflict. Compromising is something that people frequently talk about, but I'd argue that compromising is kind of the last resort. Compromising, in my opinion, is one of the least effective forms of conflict management. It's a middle ground when you are on an equivalent station with somebody else. Like neither of you guys have right to command a decision or to command a situation or mediate a conflict. Sometimes you just need to give a little and take a little to bring harmony to the situation, and that can be all kinds of different stuff. If you want to take it to a relationship perspective, you'd be surprised at the level of pettiness that can come into relationships. I've been married for 10 years at this point, and I promised myself I wouldn't argue about petty stuff. I argue about petty stuff. Like the little stuff just starts to add up. And compromising with your spouse, whom you love and whom you want to spend the rest of your life with, is a very good idea instead of competing on every little thing. And the same thing can be true of people that you hold close in the gaming context. Compromising with people, trying to find a win-win, can be good. However, I would argue that collaborating is a similar form of this, is better, where you talk through the issue, you try to understand why both sides have merits, and then you come up with a whole new idea. And so I give an example if we're trying to choose an operational target, and I really, really, really don't want to go into Drowned Vale. And trust me, this happens all the time. I'd rather go into Endless Shore, and Razor's like, no, it doesn't make any sense. We need to go in Drowned Vale. We talk about it, and then we may decide to go somewhere else entirely, right? We decide that maybe we'll split resources a little bit, but we don't necessarily compromise. We collaborate and talk through, and he understands the merits of why I don't want to go into Drowned Vale, and he understands, and we both have mutual understanding for the pros and cons of those approaches, and we try to harmonize those understandings into a better decision. Collaborating is great when you have the blessing of time, right? When you have time, you can spend time to have a committee, if you will, and go through ideas, think through opinions, and bounce ideas off one another. Time is not always a luxury you have, though, and so you can't always have the benefit of collaborating. And then the last and arguably most important conflict management technique to keep in your toolbox is avoiding. And this is one that a lot of novice managers, I'm talking in a professional context at this point, a lot of novice leaders do not know how to do this. And they fail at this more powerfully than any other thing, in that they're trying so hard to do well, and they're trying so hard to win, that they do not let conflict incubate without a response. And the bottom line is, as I mentioned before, I will mention again, most people do not have natural tendency for good and healthy conflict management, and they let their emotions get involved. And sometimes you've got to let the emotions get out of the situation. And the best way to let emotions get out of the situation is to put time and distance between the issue, is to walk away from it. I can't tell you how many times, again, in a professional context, I've had somebody storm into my office with an issue and a concern. They're hot, they're mad, they're fuming, and they may or may not be right. But whether they're right or wrong, usually what I'll do is say, listen, I completely understand why you're upset about this and why this is important to you. However, at this moment, I think that we're a little too close to the situation. I'd really like you to think about some of these things I want you to think about. Go home, sleep, get something to eat, think about it overnight, and let's talk again at 9 o'clock in the morning. Let's see if we can work this out. This is important. We need to work this out, but I'd really like you to think about some things because this is an important decision to make, and I don't think you want to make it while there's this many emotions around the issue. Is that something that you think you can do? And 9 times in 10, I'm gonna tell you, 9 times in 10, the person's like, absolutely, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And then that one time in 10, this person's like, no, we need to handle this right now. I'm ready to do this. And at that point, you got a harder conversation in front of you because you got to work through the emotions in real time. Now, that's still doable. If you've got a lot of discipline and you've got a lot of self restraint and you humble yourself and you're willing to empathize with that individual, you can get across the finish line, but it's going to be a harder conversation because that person's not rational. And you need to understand that walking into that even though that person's not rational, that doesn't mean you need to disrespect that person. That doesn't mean you need to immediately disrespect, you lose respect. That doesn't mean the person's opinions are no longer relevant. It just means that you're going to have to tread a little bit more carefully, be gentle, and be kind, and work through that person while they're going through that storm. And if you walk through life with that mindset, you're going to find that you're going to run over people a little bit less frequently and get to a better solution. At the end of the day, all of these styles of conflict management are important to know and understand. None of them are superior to any of them. All of these are very effective methods of resolving conflict. The appropriateness of the tool depends on, number one, your relationship with the individual, and number two, the importance of the issue. All of those things affect what makes sense to use and when, and I guess your level of comfortability with it, the style. And so in many cases, a lot of people are comfortable in two of these styles. I'd say most people can probably do two of these styles pretty competently, and then the other three tend to be more challenging for them for whatever reason, be it inexperience or immaturity. Those things can make it difficult if you're not used to using some of these styles. And at the end of the day, when you're having a difficult conversation, when you know you're going in, you're going to have a conflict with somebody, and it's going to be hot. You guys are at opposite ends of the spectrum. It's important to them, and it's important to you. You want to plan for that conversation. And what I mean by that is you want to go through your head about what kind of things can happen in that conversation and how you're going to respond if it happens. And one example I like to very commonly use of a very intense situation, let's say I'm going to go in and I'm going to fire an employee. And I've got good reason to fire that employee. That they've been disciplined over and over again. It is without excuse the right decision to do it. That person can respond in a variety of different ways. They can become very introspective, very thoughtful, and kind of humbly think about the situation and talk rationally and reasonably through it. They may bargain, they may negotiate through that process. They can become very emotional. They can break down and cry, lose their composure, be unable to speak, sobbing uncontrollably. They can become angry, ready to throw things, ready to march out of the room, ready to attack somebody in the room. Those are extreme situations, but all of those things can happen. And so if those things happen, what are you going to do? Like, have you premeditated what you're going to do if those things happen? And I'm going to tell you right now, I have. In those situations, I have thought through the lines. I know exactly what I'm going to do. And in many cases, I've been in all of those situations. And I've had experience in those situations. And therefore, have already honed a response to how I'm going to respond to those things. And so, as I talked about in the podcast last week, once again, preparation is a very key thing for how you manage situations, and preparing your mind and preparing your thoughts makes you less likely to be flat-footed. And if you're not flat-footed, you're less likely to say something that you're going to regret or something that you don't intend. And that's how you can maintain a calm demeanor. That's how you can maintain respect and patience and kindness in these things, by meditating how you're going to respond to things. And so I do have a few more things I want to talk about. We are running pretty close to the 1 hour mark, so we are going to want to move toward closing. So Darko, let's do this. I'd like to get your thoughts, and I have some closing thoughts that I want to share on this subject, and we'll kind of go from there.
Just some things to help out that the five primary methods. Starting off with accommodating. Don't ever take that as defeat. Accommodating is not defeat. You know, a lot of these things, if you have the idea or the mentality of, oh, this sucks, I lost, whatnot, you're only making that situation even worse. If you get what I mean. Because what we talked about last week is you want to set yourself for success, and you got to be understanding. If someone, because if you're accommodating, the other person is in some way competing. You know, they want to get their idea over. They're choosing the competing method versus you. You just came like, you know what, I'm gonna accommodate because I, want to be the better man or whatnot. But don't take it personally, and don't take it as a defeat or as a loss, because there's always almost something to learn from a situation like that. From, you get to see the the perspective of the person whose idea you're going forward. Or and this is a thing, like, to not be malicious, but say you know, you accommodate because you're going to accept whoever's, you know, whoever's idea that's going to go forward. Don't just wish for the worst so that way it fails, so you can be, yes, see, I told you guys my idea was better. It's no, that's not how you should think, because you always want to think what's the best outcome you can provide and support it to the best of your ability that you can. Don't take things personally, and do not like react impulsively to just, you know, damage or harm the situation, because if you're idling and doing nothing to support it, you are affecting the situation. Because if you feel completely discouraged because just of this conflict you had with another person on deciding something, your best bet is to just, you know what, take a break, because you're going to cause harm, and you're going to have people rely things on you because you became to that position of, I'm gonna accommodate with this person. And in the end, just talking about from like a foxhole perspective, you know, like, I didn't get to choose my idea, but we're going with someone else's. I didn't like it. I'm upset. I'm pretty angry. I know I'm not going to be the best leader because I have all these emotions. You know what, guys? I'm gonna have to sit this one out. And there's, again, there's nothing wrong with that, because you know what, you're taking that step to, like, I have to be, I need to regather myself. And maybe it might be an hour, or it could be the whole day. And but at least you gave yourself time to vent and to, like, understand. And you, like I said, that hour you can come back in the game, and, you know, maybe you can retake your position of leadership that you were going to have. But it's like you have to be understanding in going through conflict management. I think that's probably one of the key things. And it says, like, in the last thing, is to empathize with the other party. And if you don't have empathy as key, most of these ideas or most of these methods won't even, like, click to you, because you're not opening that other part of the battlefield of how to deal with the conflict, and which is understanding and empathizing. And that's like one of the key things you could ever have during, like, any of these, like, discussions or anything, or even just like as a person in general. You always want to be empathetic, because it helps build humility for you as a person, and to, you could understand why people would make a choice like that, why they would react to, you know, doing something bad to anyone, because, like, you get an idea why, and you put yourself in their shoes. Doesn't make it okay, but it still helps you understand why and what provoked that response, and you can better assert yourself how to deal and react positively, while, you know, not creating a worse situation. You can actually, you know, resolve a situation. I think that's pretty much it for again, just, you know, just short little sentences. I know this
Yeah.
is probably the
I
last
appreciate
what we
that.
got.
There's two things that I like to do to close us out a little bit, and we spent this time kind of laying the framework, and we've talked at a very high level, I think, and at a theoretical level of a lot of conflict. I'd like to close this out by very briefly talking about two high profile instances of conflict in our community, and really kind of assess it and analyze it for a second, just for the sake of a tabletop kind of thinking exercise here. So
All right,
the
all
first
right,
one to kind of think back on a little bit, and I think most recent in my mind, is some of the conflicts that we have seen between both factions by players and prominent players and clans in regards to tech splitting. You've seen a lot of conflict over that, and you've seen people choose different methods of conflict resolution of that, some more successfully than others. I'm going to kind of analyze DK's approach to it because I'm most intimately familiar with that, and talk a little bit about where I think we went right and where I think we went wrong and why, because I think it can be helpful to meditate and reflect on that a little bit. And so, to kind of set the stage a little bit, one of the things I think we did well from the outset is when the tech system was first introduced, DK tried to get together with as many people as would come to the table on the Warden faction side, most of them from clans. And so, some people would argue that that was short sighted of us. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But, and they got in a room and spent time collaborating over what they felt was best for us as a faction. People brought their ideas to the table. They discussed. People had strong opinions. They competed in that room for what they thought was best, but ultimately they walked out of the room collaborating for a solution that they thought would harmonize everybody's interests and in a way that everybody could agree with. And getting that consensus was not easy the first go around, as I understand it. Now, I was not in the room, but I heard about the way that they approached it, and I thought felt very good about it. Where we went wrong and what happened subsequently is that people that were not in on that discussion very reasonably had other opinions of where they thought the faction might should go. And they did not feel respected because they were excluded from the discussion. And as they brought up their concerns and as they brought up their opinions, they were quickly shouted down and shut down and not listened to or heard or brought to the table, and ultimately were disrespected. They felt disrespected at the very least. Whether they were actually disrespected or not, they felt that way, and that's all that matters. And as a result, certain members of the community got a little excited, got a little emotional about it, and started to become more and more aggressive, started to compete harder and harder. And similarly, members of our leadership team, I think very rationally, but still at the same time not good, got emotionally involved as well, got frustrated with the situation, and decided that, f this guy, f these guys. We don't negotiate with terrorists. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of attitude. And what happened was a tech war, right? We had a tech split because certain members of the faction decided to compete on that, and that universally harmed everybody. Nobody won in that situation. And what could we have done differently? Is there a way, or is there a world that we could have brought that person to the table and tried to collaborate better and say, hey, listen, let's talk this out, man. Talking this out in world chat's probably not good, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. And we've already spent some time talking about this and seen a lot of ideas, but we'd love to bring you to the table. Let's talk through this. Was that a solution? Maybe not. Would that have worked? Maybe, maybe not. But we didn't try. We didn't respect the individual enough because already he didn't show good conflict technique to begin with. He started out by being a little antagonistic, and as a result, many members of our leadership team were not in a mind to be very gracious there. And as a result, I think we all lost at the end of the day. And I think thinking back on this situation again is a very, very interesting foxhole discussion of kind of where we got with conflict and how we ended up there. Another situation that we had a high profile level of involvement with was the whole helping Hans situation. And I feel pretty comfortable and confident to speak about that. I know that got the whole community worked up and tied up in knots. But there was conflict. There was conflict between members, a multi-clan coalition of dedicated players that took significant issue with the way that Helping Hans was choosing to stream the game. And he was showing intel on the stream that a lot of our dedicated players felt compromised the back lines that they worked hours on. And from our leadership's perspective, the idea in our head was, those players put countless hours in that work. They don't feel good about this. And there's a pretty significant coalition of those players that put hours upon hours and upon hours in this game that don't feel good about this. We think it's reasonable for them to be respected. And so we felt anyway, I'm going to put how we felt because this is obviously coming from my side. We went and tried to bargain in good faith with Helping Hans. We tried to reach out to him, and we did not feel respected in return. Now, that's us starting to get a little petty. I'm going to acknowledge it for what it is. I feel that we probably started to get a little petty at a certain point because we did not feel that he was being respectful toward us or our ideas. We felt he was being dismissive and was not willing to come to the table. He was only competing and advocating for his ideas. And I think some of us tried to understand where he was coming from. I think some of us weren't interested in where he was coming from, just very openly.
If I can cut in with
Yeah,
that,
go
because
ahead.
I want to just stress on the fact of the matter is, both parties no one was acting like angels in any of these such
Hmm.
scenarios and whatnot. There's
I agree.
always there's almost always a better solution to go about things, because I could even chime in because I was in the wrong with one of my interactions with him, where he took something of mine, and I was just so emotional, so upset when he gave it back. I was like, F it, I don't even care about it anymore, and I destroyed it. And it was like, I just come to think to myself, why did I do that? Like, I was just so upset and everything. One of my impulses was just to, cause grief in general. And that's something that's just not good, because you're harming relations. And it doesn't matter if you wish to build anything or not with anyone, with him or not. It's just how you are as a person. And if I would have reacted and looked better, it's in the end, it's still points that add on to you as an individual. Now, as like for me, I got negative points in that situation. If you get what I mean, where all they focus on what I am is, oh, that dude just grief. He gave it back, and he was still, he griefed it. So that was his whole opinion. He was just a griefer,
Hmm.
and that's, I mean, I lost on that, and I'm willing to, accept that. That was my fault. I was upset he did something, he wronged me, but I shouldn't have wronged him back. It comes to things. I'm not trying to be a hypocrite. I'm saying to always be the better person, because I'm not perfect. I'm trying at least to be the better person when I can, and
Right.
it's like, it's just a rough because there's almost always a better solution versus like just burning everything or to
Hmm.
like get the worst action possible. But it's just I don't know. It's just like you just have to find the right angle and have the time to like actually engage the conversation in a rational manner because a
Right.
lot of the times it's just and someone's not going to want to compromise when they've just been like harassed and vote kicked and removed. They're already upset at that point. You provoked anger in
Right.
them because you're ruining their experience right now, and then wanting to have a discussion right after that, it's not gonna. I mean you think you're ever going to win a conversation against an angry individual? It's almost
Right.
impossible. You can if you try hard enough,
Right.
but you're setting yourself up to fail if you want to have a conversation with someone you just effed over. It's like that's just what my 2 cents in the whole matter.
And I appreciate your 2 cents because I think your 2 cents are right on point there. Just to kind of restate what Dark said, and I want to emphasize that yes, I think both parties did not behave as well as they could have in this situation, and I think taking some time to own that is healthy for us to do. And I think even now, I'm talking from my perspective. I think I need to like a disclaimer at this point. The thoughts and opinions of Kasansky do not necessarily reflect the thoughts and opinions of 82DK, like something like that. And so I'm speaking just very real from my perspective and how I feel about this situation, looking back on it and reflecting, because I was party to a lot of this, so I feel like I can really speak authoritatively on it because I helped influence some of the decisions that we took. I ultimately consented to the idea and thought it was our best recourse to lay a line in the sand with Hans. Looking back on that, I'm not convicted that that was the right decision. And what's more frustrating about that, and we talked about this last podcast, is ultimately it worked. It took a long time, but we were at war literally with helping Hans, and he came back to the table, became a bigger man, and started to compromise with us and collaborate with us and try to work a solution that could harmonize the dispute. And so some of our guys look at this and say, "Ha, it worked." But one thing I want to emphasize from last podcast is just because it worked doesn't mean it was good technique. Just because you win doesn't mean you won because of your talent and skill. You can sometimes stumble your way into victories that you shouldn't have won, right? And I think taking a moment to reflect on that and consider what we could have done differently there and how we ought to respond differently is constructive because we came up against a brick wall at the time of a man that we felt was not willing to compromise or even collaborate with us. And he was only willing to compete on his idea, and we felt so strongly about it that we felt escalation was the only option left. But did we exhaust every single channel of intervention? I think some of us would say we did. And I think Razor would certainly probably say, I mean, because I want to give kudos to Razor. Razor really went out of his way to try to have a very direct conversation with Hans and with other members of ASS at the time to try to get collaboration around this thing. And so I think to his credit, he really did put in the effort and energy. But I think egos got involved on both sides, and with escalation comes damaged relationships, and ultimately the whole community got dragged up into a whole bunch of nonsense that if I'm looking back on the ramifications, the fallout of it, does DK, because my main responsibility is looking out for the reputation of DK, looking out for the good of our guys, the development of our guys, to make sure our guys have a good time. Did DK exit that environment favorably or unfavorably? I think depending on your slant, you may come up with a different answer to that. And even now, I think it's a good example to discuss and to demonstrate that good conflict management is hard. And it's sometimes very cloudy on what the right decision is because you can never go back in the past and try something different and see how it would have worked. And so we've talked in theoretical terms through the vast majority of this session tonight. And I think those theoretical terms have been healthy for understanding the philosophy and the principle, but do understand that good conflict management is hard and that conflicts are complicated and that you're never going to get it right all the time. And one thing Dark mentioned before that I didn't emphasize enough in this, and I wish I had, is having the integrity and having the humility to walk in and apologize when you've done wrong is of exceptionally important quality to both leadership and to that humility and that respect. And being willing to open your mind to the possibility that you did do something wrong. Whether you were actually wrong or not, at least having the humility to get there and to question yourself, to question and bring yourself low enough to consider the world that you could maybe be wrong on occasion, and that's a very important thing I think to navigating complex conflicts, especially with important people in your life. And I really am passionate about this subject for professional reasons. I'm passionate about it for personal reasons because I've been party to and I've witnessed so much pain in my life and the life of people I love and care about, because people become selfish and they become intemperate and they see their ideas as more important than their loved ones. And they fight and they fight and they fight and they fight, and ultimately they no longer love that person anymore because the issue became more important than the person. That's a horrible way to live. If you care for people you care about, and comparing that to Foxhole in a casual context seems ridiculous, and I think it is to some extent. But I would definitely consider honing those abilities and honing those skills in a safe environment, as we talked about before. And so we are running a little bit over, and I appreciate those that kind of came out and listened to this tonight. I hope that you found this thought provoking. That's all we're looking for. I want to make sure that be clear that we are no means perfect men or right about everything. I just want you to think. That's all I'm looking for you to do is think, consider, and make choices for yourself on what's good, what's right, and what can make you a better person and better player ultimately. I think those things are things that we can all gain by meditating and thinking a little bit about how we can do things and live. So what we'll do to close this out is if there are any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. We can try to do some of that for if anybody wants to do that. We'll try to field some of that. We'll also continue to take suggestions for things that we can do better as we do this podcast. We do intend to do this once a week, every Tuesday night around the same time. That's kind of the rhythm that we're trying to get into, and we're going to try to continue on topics that harmonize personal, professional, and what I'm calling in-game development. So if you've got topics that you're interested in along those lines, I'm good for that too. I've got a lot of experience teaching on a wide variety of subjects, and I do have a lineup of different topics that I've got prepared. But anything that you're interested in as a viewer or a listener, I'm definitely open to. You can always ping me on Discord, ping us in the No Man's Land channel in the 82DK Discord, or even through comments, whatever venue's best for you. But I think with that being said, that's all I've got for this evening. Dark, anything that you want to say to close us out?
No, nothing really either. I mean, just as you said, we thank you guys just giving the time to actually watch and listen. And if you enjoy it, you know what I mean. Like, thank you. Because it means a lot that you guys are enjoying. Like, I'm like I feel like just a glorified listener, just listening to Kaz the whole time giving his TED talk, and it's fucking amazing. Just listening to it the whole time. Half the time I don't even want to say anything because I don't want to stop this man. But then he brings my name in, and it's like, oh fuck, I forgot I'm in this too. But I think the only thing I'd probably say just to end this off, unless you guys got anything else to say right now, just currently, we could probably leave it like 2 more minutes before we just end it, and then
Appreciate that feedback, dude. We've got the VODs for this will be up, so you'll be able to watch both the old stream or catch up on this stream. You should be able to catch it if you want to hear the rest of it. It should be all out there. We are working with Razer a little bit on making sure that we can publish this information on the YouTube channel as well, I believe, and so we are trying to
we're,
make it accessible.
we're having a conflict right now with him, so we're trying to utilize one of the five methods possible. Right now,
Yeah,
he's not conceding, so
we'll get there. We'll get there. All right, guys. Since we're running late, I am going to go ahead and abruptly cut this off. Thanks again for your support, and thanks in advance for any ideas and any feedback you guys share. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and we
you guys
will
have a good one.
cut this off here if I can figure out how to close it off.
Yeah, make sure you say when you exit too, because I know last time I was saying a bunch of stuff about people, and I don't definitely want that leaked out again.
Have a good night, guys.